সুপ্রিয় দর্শক সবাইকে আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি ফার্মিং ফিউচার বাংলাদেশ নিবেদিত দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপে, পাওয়ার্ড বাই কাজী ফার্মস, কো-স্পন্সর্ড বাই এয়ার মালিক সিড। দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপের মাধ্যমে আমরা প্রতি সপ্তাহে কৃষির নানাবিধ সমস্যা ও সমাধানের উপায় নিয়ে আলোচনা করছি। আমরা এই সপ্তাহে আলোচনা করব গ্লোবাল ফুড সিকিউরিটি অ্যান্ড রোল অফ এগ্রিকালচার ইনোভেশন ইন বাংলাদেশ। এই বিষয়ে আলোচনার জন্য আজকে আমাদের সাথে যুক্ত হয়েছেন মিস্টার রবার্ট সিমসন, কান্ট্রি রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ FAO in Bangladesh, and Mr. Mark Davis, Senior Technical Advisor FAO. দর্শক, আমরা জানি খাদ্য উৎপাদন করতে গেলে সার, কীটনাশক এবং অন্যান্য বিভিন্ন উপাদান ব্যবহার করতে হয়। বাংলাদেশের কৃষকরা অনেক সময় সেগুলো মাত্রাতিরিক্ত উপায়ে ব্যবহার করেন। তাছাড়া এই কীটনাশক আমদানি করার ফলেও অনেক সময় অব্যবহৃত কীটনাশক পরিবেশের জন্য হুমকির কারণ হতে পারে। আজকে তেমনই একটি বিষয় নিয়ে আমরা আলোচনা করব, যেখানে বাংলাদেশ বেশ কয়েক বছর আগে 60-এর দশকে ডিডিটি নামক একটি ক্ষতিকর উপাদান বাংলাদেশ আমদানি করেছিল, যেটা অব্যবহৃত রয়ে যায়। খুব দুঃখজনক হলেও সত্যি যে সেটা অব্যবহৃত থাকার কারণে পরিবেশের উপর একটা হুমকির কারণ হয়ে দাঁড়িয়েছিল। বাংলাদেশ সরকার এবং জাতিসংঘের ফুড অ্যান্ড এগ্রিকালচার অর্গানাইজেশন তারা যৌথভাবে সেই ডিডিটি অপসারণের জন্য দীর্ঘ প্রায় 15 বছর ধরে কাজ করে যাচ্ছিল। আমরা খুব আনন্দের সাথে জানাচ্ছি সম্প্রতি সেই ক্ষতিকর ডিডিটি বাংলাদেশ থেকে আমরা অবমুক্ত করতে সক্ষম হয়েছি। আজকে আমরা আলোচনা করব সেই প্রক্রিয়া সম্পর্কে এবং সেই সাথে খাদ্য পুষ্টি নিরাপত্তার জন্য আসলে FAO বাংলাদেশে কী কী কাজ করছে, আগামী দিনগুলোতে বাংলাদেশ সরকার কী কী পদক্ষেপ নিতে পারে সেই সম্পর্কে আমরা আলোচনা করব। আসুন আমরা ফিরে যাই মূল আলোচনায়। মিস্টার রবার্ট, উই ওয়েলকাম ইউ টু আওয়ার উইকলি ডিসকাশন প্রোগ্রাম, ফার্মিং ফিউচার দীপ্ত টেলিভিশন টক শো। You know that the population is increasing globally, and very recently the milestone of 8 billion people has become a momentum and talk for many of the experts. So do you think that the potential and probability of food security and the growth of population will have some impact in the smallholder community, particularly in the developing countries like Bangladesh?
Thank you. Thank you, Arif. It's good to be back on Farming Future Bangladesh. I appreciate your welcome. It's an amazing milestone that we've passed 8 billion people on our planet. And to be that 8th billion person is quite an honor, but also a challenge. And so I would agree with you. The planet does face challenges. What I would say is that in all of history, humankind, we've always been able to produce enough food for the people on the planet. And I would say that it continues today, and that will more than likely continue in the future. We've had opportunities like technical advancement, digital revolution, more scientific research and inputs that have always allowed us to produce more and more food. The bigger challenges that we foresee today and looking into the future is some of the challenges that we have in climate unpredictability. And this is to say that we're having increased droughts.
Right.
We have increased storm intensity, we have a bit of increased or sporadic flooding, unpredictable cyclones, these sorts of things. And that puts a challenge on a very specific geographic area. And so the challenges of feeding 8 billion people is much more on predictability of natural resources and availability, as well as the distribution of food. So again, I go back to that. There's always enough food, but there's pockets of those that are impacted by these climate actions. There's forced displacement of populations that you often have in a war context. And so these are the areas where we have to really focus and come together as a population to ensure the food security on a global scale.
I'll get back to you, but before that, Mark, in the introduction, we have mentioned with our audience, with our viewers, that DDT, a very harmful pesticide, has been stacked in Bangladesh, and very recently FAO and Bangladesh government has gained the milestone of getting rid of that harmful confinement we had here. So can you tell us a little bit of that, and what success we are foreseeing based on the knowledge and learning we have from this incident?
Of course. FAO, together with the government of Bangladesh, formulated a project which is called pesticide risk reduction in Bangladesh. So we've been working across a broad spectrum of issues, and one of the key issues that we dealt with was this large stockpile of DDT that had been stored in a medical sub-depot in Chattogram since 1985. So it's almost 40 years this chemical has been there, and over time it has degraded so that the containers have fallen apart. The powder was released, it was a dry formulation. Some of it was released into the environment when floods hit that location. So this was a very dangerous chemical stored in a very large quantity, 500 tons, in a single location in the middle of the city of Chattogram. So we were very concerned that this was a high-risk situation, and we wanted to work with the government to try and find an appropriate solution. Now, I've designed and implemented projects like this in many countries around the world. So we designed a project which basically aimed to repackage this waste and to have it safely destroyed. It was a very messy and difficult operation.
And it took a long time.
It took several months. I first came here in 2007, so it's taken 15 years to finalize the operation. But the operation itself started in March of this year and is being completed pretty much as we speak now. The last shipments are leaving Bangladesh. They've gone to port.
We'll get back to you, but before that, I would like to ask Mr. Robert, climate change has become a critical issue in Bangladesh and in other developing countries, particularly like the most affected vulnerable countries. And now we are talking about agricultural transformation. The whole system needs to be transformed. We talk about resilience. We talk about relief to resilience, where you need to sustain within the system. So where we actually are now relying on the resources and what capacity we have for coming days to tackle all the challenges.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. Climate change isn't just an issue of agriculture. Climate change is probably the challenge of our generation. And we're on a critical moment, as our Secretary General of the United Nations has said in his last 2 years of his annual addresses. Climate change and climate issues are the most pressing issue to humankind that we're facing at this moment. This said, we also had helped organize, FAO helped organize the Food System Summit in October of 2021 and November of 2021 when it was organized in New York. Within this context, it was made remarkably clear that agriculture and our food systems account for upwards of 30% of all global greenhouse gases that are produced. This is a massive impact on climate change. As well, it was recognized that our food systems are no longer necessarily fit for purpose. And this ties in to your earlier question about 8 billion people on the planet and assuring food security and nutrition security for all 8 billion people.
See, it's a bit of paradoxical. I mean, on one hand, we need more produce, and on the other hand, there would be some sort of consequence where we'll have effect on the environment.
Well, so you can look at it as a paradox or a contradictory challenge, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a recognition of the interrelatedness of all the things that we do to survive on the planet. And producing our food doesn't have to be a high global impact. So we look at, as you pointed out, the different areas of climate resilience, which is adapting to climate change. And so this is new rice varieties that can be grown in saline environments or using vertical gardening to use a smaller geographic space to produce more food, more efficient ways of irrigating through buried pipes and solar systems instead of using diesel for pumping water. These are all ways of adapting to that scenario, but we can also mitigate. And there's different mitigation areas of using wet-dry systems of rice production that reduces methane gas, producing milk more efficiently, so you have less methane from the cattle industry. So there's a lot of different ways that we can transform our agriculture sector to ensure that we produce more, safer, and higher quality food without necessarily having negative impacts on our immediate environment, but also the climate.
And we might need to look into the economical benefit of the smallholder, because if we talk about Bangladesh, then smallholder farmers are the only producer in our country mostly. So Robert was mentioning about safer ways of producing food, and when we talk about climate change, sometimes we see that newer pests are coming forward, like new disease and other thing, and people don't mind. Many of the farmers technically they don't follow the proper instruction of using pesticide and harmful pesticide, which might have negative impact on human health and environment. So do you think that things might need to change in coming days and farmers need to follow like better practice. We talk about good agriculture practice. We talk about IPM. Newer tools are coming forward like pest resistant crop, genetically modified crop, gene editing. All these things are together. But do you think that can Bangladesh learn from all these, issues that we are having, and do you have actually enough skill and capacity to move ahead?
Capacity is definitely there. And these issues, as Robert has already said, are not unique to Bangladesh. They apply to farmers around the world. It's important to recognize, first of all, that pest management in agriculture is integral to crop production. So if you have a resilient crop that's being grown, it will be more resilient to pests and diseases in the same way as it is resilient to the impacts of climate change, for example. So you need to look after the soil, you need to look after the environment to make sure that that resilience is there. Now, a healthy crop in a healthy environment will require fewer pesticides. And I think what the direction that Bangladeshi as well as other farmers need to be taking is to have a better understanding of the ecosystem in which they are operating. Growing crops is part of the natural process. It depends on natural systems such as soil nutrition, such as irrigation, water, rainfall, whether it comes naturally or whether it comes from an irrigation system. So plants need to be well nourished, well irrigated, the soil needs to be in good condition, and all of these things depend on farmer knowledge. So we have to, first of all, acknowledge that the farmers are experts in their own right, but also give them the tools and the information that they need to be able to help their crops be more resilient to climate change as well as to pests and diseases. Pest management itself, there's an almost automatic reaction. If there's a pest in the field, let's use a chemical. It doesn't have to be a chemical. There are many, many other ways of dealing with pests. We can deal with pests through cultural controls. For example, you can select resistant varieties of crops. You can plant them in ways that help them to resist diseases or certain...
Or crop rotating, another thing might be beneficial.
Absolutely, rotations and so forth. All of these things help to prevent pests and diseases in crops. And farmers know these things and need to be advised and reminded that these are good practices. Then there are mechanical controls. You can use pheromone traps, for example, where you're not spreading pesticides in the field, but you're bringing the pests to the pesticide.
Mark, you were talking about, like the knowledge and capacity that we had from this recent issue and incident, the DDT. Can you talk a little bit about it for our viewers and audience?
Of course. The project has been designed in collaboration with government and could not be implemented without full collaboration of many departments and units from the government. So we really appreciate the high level of collaboration that we've had from throughout this project because it simply could not have been done without that. And the project has also been designed to leave knowledge in the country, so to build capacity in areas where the government needs to, feels the need to perhaps move forward in certain areas. So we have been working with the Department of Agriculture Extension, looking at the way pesticides are regulated and the way they're being used at the moment, and seeing if there are things that we can do to help to advance knowledge and advance capacity in various departments.
So what learning and like the capacity building we have for the recent issue we had on the DDT, and how actually government is like taking this forward?
So what I would like to say, I'd like to emphasize that without full collaboration of many departments in government, and the ministries and departments and other units within the city of Chattogram and the district of Chattogram, we could not have implemented this project. So I'd like to really express our appreciation for that collaboration. And beyond that, the project is designed with government also to ensure that the capacity is being developed in areas such as sustainable pest management, using biological pesticides, using cultural controls and alternatives to pesticides as much as possible, reducing the risk from pesticides. We're also working with the Department of the Environment to put in place systems for the management of empty pesticide containers so that we remove that source of contamination from the environment. And in addition to that, other agricultural plastics, which is a big contamination problem, plastics in the environment. We're working with the Department of Health to build a poison monitoring center and help to control poisonings from pesticides. And we're working with the Department of Fisheries to ensure that fish drying, where sometimes pesticides are used to keep insects off, are also taken out of the equation.
Great. Robert, Bangladesh has recently celebrated 50 years of independence, and FAO in Bangladesh has almost like a similar timeline for their intervention. Now we are living in a time where we have like COVID, climate change, and national and international, like crisis, inflation, and everything. So, do you think that these newer technologies and the approaches and the strategies and suggestions from like the expertise that FAO has and the intervention that you have will actually benefit countries like Bangladesh in the coming days, particularly if we talk about like modernization of agriculture, transformation of the agriculture system, engagement of youth and women in agriculture, empowering them, particularly health of the farmers and consumers. So what is your like comment and statement?
Yeah, thank you, Arif. That's a large question, but I would like to appreciate the efforts of government and the relationship that FAO has had since independence. And we've really worked closely together on very pointed production systems and increasing production in the early days, and now moving on to more nuanced of transformation of agriculture to fit the needs of a population that's moving from where it is today, and as you pointed out, to some degree, subsistence agriculture, to a commercialized, mechanized, and diversified agriculture systems to look at nutrition security and the more commercial means of doing business at this point. Looking
and
at
safer way of like producing the food. Thank you, Mr. Robert, and thank you, Mr. Mark, for sharing all the knowledge and information with our viewer. Yep. দর্শক, আমরা জানি খাদ্যের উৎপাদন এবং উৎপাদনশীলতা বজায় রাখার জন্য সার, কীটনাশক এবং অন্যান্য কেমিক্যাল ব্যবহার করা হয়, মাঠে কৃষকরা সেগুলো ব্যবহার করেন। আমরা আজকে শুনলাম যে খাদ্যের উৎপাদনশীলতা বজায় রাখতে হবে। পৃথিবীর জনসংখ্যা হয়েছে প্রায় 8 বিলিয়ন, কিন্তু সেই উৎপাদন এবং উৎপাদনশীলতা বজায় রাখার পাশাপাশি পরিবেশের প্রতি এবং পরিবেশের উপর যাতে বিরূপ কোনো প্রভাব না আসে সেই বিষয়ে আমাদের লক্ষ্য রাখতে হবে যাতে কৃষক এবং ভোক্তার স্বাস্থ্যের কোনো ঝুঁকি আমরা খাদ্য উৎপাদন প্রক্রিয়ার মধ্যে না নিয়ে আসি। আমরা আশা করব নতুন প্রযুক্তি এবং প্রযুক্তিগত উন্নয়নের ফলে বাংলাদেশের কৃষিতে যেই উৎপাদনশীলতা বজায় রয়েছে সেটি চলমান থাকবে, প্রত্যেকের ঘরে নিরাপদ এবং পুষ্টিকর খাদ্য পৌঁছে যাবে, সেই আশাবাদ ব্যক্ত করে বিদায় নিচ্ছি ফার্মিং ফিউচার বাংলাদেশ নিবেদিত দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপের এই সপ্তাহের আয়োজন থেকে। আমাদের পরবর্তী অনুষ্ঠান দেখবার আমন্ত্রণ রইল প্রতি শুক্রবার বিকাল 4:30 মিনিটে। সবাই ভালো থাকবেন, নিরাপদে থাকবেন, ধন্যবাদ।